Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Going Off Track podcast. I'm Catherine, and this is part 3 of our spring break sprint that is going to be going on through all of April long, because I'm crazy, apparently. In case you missed it, you can watch the first video in the series, which is linked above, that explains everything. But long story short, I am diving into old F1 lore from before I became an F1 fan in 2021, and I'm helping educate other Drive to Survive era F1 fans about the sport. In yesterday's episode, I talked about that one time that Kimi Räikkönen almost bankrupted an F1 team because they accidentally built a good car and hired a world champion to drive it. Awkward. So you can also check that one out. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss a video in this series or all season long, so I can continue to inflict my motorsport opinions on the greater population. And if you're listening to this on your preferred podcast platform, please don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That will also allow me to continue to inflict my motorsport opinions, and I like doing that. So today we're talking about drivers who have won their first ever F1 race, and there are actually 3 of them. Though one is a technicality. We love technicalities here, but these things do happen. So this is both an interesting and kind of a whatever kind of stat, but these are things that I'm interested in. I like random things in record books. So obviously, in the first season of Formula One, which was in 1950, which technically was F1's first season, but the first season with the FIA World Championship was not until 1950. So there were a few racing seasons of F1 in the 40s that just don't technically count. So obviously, you're going to have a first-time driver in F1 that season who wins that first race. And that guy was Giuseppe Farina. And he won the 1950 British Grand Prix driving for the OG iteration of Alfa Romeo. And of course, he won from pole. So good for him. Now, interesting things about that race is that race featured, like, you could do anything rules-wise back in the 1950s. The regulations that we have today are very strict. They're very organized. They're very set out. Whereas back in 1950, like, if you rocked up and you had a car, basically you could drive. And so this actually featured 2 cars in that race that fielded 2 different drivers in the same car. So the first one was Maserati, had Joe Fry. He drove the first 45 laps of the race, and then Brian Shaw Taylor took over the last 19 races, finishing P10. Unfortunately, P10 at the time was out of the points because the points only went down to P5. But they still finished that race with 2 different drivers. And then the second one was Era. Peter Walker drove the first 2 laps, and then Tony Roll took over for 3 laps before they had to retire the car for a gearbox issue. But that is just something that you would never see in modern Formula One. Like, yes, we had a couple years ago where Williams withdrew Logan Sargent from participating in a race because they knew that Alex Albon would have had a better result, and Alex's car was very, very broken, so they gave Sargent's car to Albon. But you don't have 2 drivers in the same car. Though, that said, I think that if any team could get away with kicking a driver out of the car mid-race, it would be McLaren. And you know why. And you know exactly which driver they'd be kicking out in favor of the other. Anyway, Farina also, interestingly, is one of the few F1 drivers to have ever scored a third of a point. Like, we've had half points be given out, especially a couple years ago. So, like, sometimes you'll see in the championship standings, but a third of a point is something that you really don't see very often. So the next driver, and this is kind of the driver that's on technicality, but we're doing this second because chronologically this is how it happened. But Johnny Parsons won his first F1 race because he won the Indy 500 in 1950, because the Indy 500 was part of the F1 schedule in 1950 and 10 times afterwards. It was, interestingly, not his first Indy 500. He finished P2 in 1949, but because the World Championship didn't exist, and because the Indy 500 was part of the F1 calendar, it still marked his F1 debut. But he also only ever competed in F1 through the Indy 500. But still, it counts that he won in his F1 debut. Now, in number 3, and this we go 11 years later to the 1961 French Grand Prix, is Giancarlo Baghetti, who drove for Ferrari, but not the Ferrari that we know and love today. It was a team called FISA Ferrari. And like I said, this was back in the wild west of Formula One, where you could just rock up in at any type of season and any time of year if you had a car. So the French Grand Prix was actually the 4th race of the season, but it was Baghetti's debut in Formula One. He ended up finishing 9th in the championship with 1 point scoring finish, which was that one win, and 2 other DNFs. Because if you think reliability is a problem now in 2026, oh boy, was it worse back in the day. Now, the other thing that's really interesting to me is that in the F1 record book, which is a place that I refer to a lot, and you'll see Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, Michael Schumacher's names all over it. You know, Kimi is coming with his youngest two ever records that he is either breaking or joining the top 10 with. But in the record book under fewest races before a win, I thought it was really interesting that 5 of the 13 drivers featured there are actually American. It just, you know, I've said this before, and I've said this before in the series, like the American connection to Formula One and international motorsport was obviously a lot bigger than it is now, where even, you know, now today, it's like, where is the next American F1 driver going to come from, and are they going to be getting good? Those are the questions that we're probably a few years out of getting an answer to. Now, most of these early appearances in the fewest races before first win happened between 1950 and 1961, with the exception of Emerson Fittipaldi in the 1970 United States Grand Prix, which was his 4th F1 race, and Clay Regazzoni at the 1970 Italian Grand Prix, which was his 5th race. And then we have no changes to this portion of the record book until 1996, where Jacques Villeneuve won the 1996 European Grand Prix, which was his 4th race in Formula One. The European Grand Prix that year took place in Germany, but the European Grand Prix also is like the umbrella name for a number of different races. It's very interesting. So the most recent was in 1996 through Villeneuve. Obviously, it's very hard to win as a rookie in Formula One, especially now. It took Kimi Antonelli to get a full season under his belt before he even sniffed at a win. Okay, he had a couple podiums last year, but you know what I mean. So it's very difficult to rock up on day one and say, I'm going to win a race. But we'll see. Now, up next, we've got episode 4 coming, where I'm going to talk about my thoughts on some interesting names of corners at F1 circuits. So don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss a video, and leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for going off track with me, and I will see you in the next one.